Hello, and welcome to a reading from the Taliban, Afghanistan's most lethal insurgent group, written by Mark Selinsky and published by Praeger, an imprint of Bloomsbury Publishing in New York, New York. This reading is brought to you by Kensington Security Consulting, where we bring education to national security. This reading looks at the fighting and the ceasefires, and a very colorful character. An al-Qaeda strategist analyzes the early fight. Soon after the initial American victories and the Taliban defeats, al-Qaeda leaders began to write lessons from the war. One student and practitioner of war was Said al-Adel, see Profile 22, a former Egyptian Special Forces officer and later an al-Qaeda military operations commander. Al-Adel wrote a series of articles on lessons learned in Afghanistan for his Islamist compatriots in Iraq. Through these articles, he evaluated the war in Afghanistan and offered suggestions about how Muslims could defeat Americans. According to Al-Adel, the Taliban were very inventive in provisioning and billeting soldiers and their families. Hot meals were provided to fighting men, often during long battles. Administrative affairs were decentralized, and each staging ground for battle had a mobile kitchen. Al-Adel and others were impressed by the ability to keep Taliban fighters clothed, fed, and sometimes upbeat during battle. In Kandahar, the Taliban used a zone defense to fend off American attacks. They reformulated the pre-September 2001 defensive tactics to concentrate on protecting sectors. They created 3 sectors: Airport and Camp Operations Sector, City Operations Sector, and Emergency Force Sector. The Emergency Force, unlike the airport and camp units, was mobile. It was well equipped with modern trucks to deploy rapidly in the greater Kandahar area. It had anti-armor, anti-aircraft, and howitzers, and contained the best fighters. These zone defenses delayed but could not possibly prevent the conquest by the fortified Northern Alliance fighters, who were supported by U.S. air power. For offensive operations, the Taliban would divide into groups of 10, which would work independently during the day and more closely coordinate in night operations. They preferred operating in units of 10 men to avoid concentrating forces en masse, which would give the coalition forces opportunity to attack with air forces. Veteran Taliban would lead these groups of 10 men and engage coalition forces in ambushes and direct firefights. Less experienced Taliban forces would serve in secondary positions to gain experience and ready themselves as a reserve force. Taliban used sewers as avenues of approach. The Taliban could also quickly evacuate women and children from parts of a city to nearby villages in anticipation of hostilities. Non-combatants could be sheltered or removed from the combat zone when fighting began. When Taliban soldiers were injured, they were often transported to hospitals or field units in Pakistan. Casualties were generally not left in Afghan hospitals. This impressed non-Taliban military observers. Maintaining effective communications was a constant challenge for the Taliban because of the advanced U.S. electronic capabilities and the Taliban's relatively primitive systems. Even here, the Taliban showed inventiveness by sending multiple couriers and using different routes during battle. These lessons would impact future operations. The fighting finishes. Temporarily. Unlike other wars, there were few named battles in the coalition's destruction of the Taliban in 2001. There were several quasi-suicidal attacks similar to Japanese banzai attacks of the dying days of the war in the Pacific. Fighters, presumed to be Chechens, became suicide bombers, strapping explosives to their bodies and pretending to surrender before blowing themselves up when captured by Northern Alliance soldiers. By most accounts, the Taliban and their allies fought bravely. In Kunduz, a key city that straddles the only main road to Kabul and the south, American B-52 and F-18 bombers were called in to support the Northern Alliance after the Northern Alliance pleaded for air support. North of Kunduz, Chechen, and Arab fighters staged a last stand in the village of Dashti-Archi, near Afghanistan's border with Tajikistan. The Taliban lost the engagements, but impressed their opponents with their steady determination. The Taliban were not through fighting. For the first time in 5 years, the warlords of the Afghan north celebrated strategic victory. General Mohammad Qasim Fahim, the middle-aged leader of the Northern Alliance, succeeded the recently murdered and still treasured Ahmed Shah Massoud. Like Massoud, Fahim was a Tajik and built his reputation battling the Soviets. Thank you for listening to this reading from The Taliban, Afghanistan's most lethal insurgent group. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and liking it. Nothing in this book represents the official position of any person or agency of the United States government. On behalf of Kensington Security Consulting, thank you for listening.